All right. So the first existential question that we have to ask today, well, what is desired state configuration? And I left this slide blank because, I really felt like I'm probably not the best person to answer that question as completely as someone else can. So Jeffrey Snover, I think, might be able to answer the question for us. So thanks, Jeffrey.
So, howdy, if you don't know me, I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm a distinguished engineer and lead architect for Windows and Windows Server and System Center. And a lot of people ask the question, why desired state configuration? Why are you doing that? And what they really mean is why not, right? Why not just use Salt? Why not just use Chef? Why not just use Ansible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I assert that that's actually the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is really, why PowerShell? Why do we invent PowerShell? Why do we invent PowerShell when there are all these great Unix tools out there? And why not just bring those? And a little bit of history. When I joined Microsoft in '99, that's exactly what I came to do. In fact, I worked really hard to try and get something called Services for Unix, a bunch of Unix utilities available on Windows. I came that close to getting them shipped in Windows, but concern over IP, is it really pure, said we couldn't ship it in Windows. We had to make it available, freely available as a download. Now, it turns out that that worked out well because it was a complete failure. It was a complete failure. And the reason for this is the heart of the issue. And it turns out that Unix is a document-oriented operating system, right? In Unix, everything's a document, right? So my joke is that in Unix, all management tools do exactly two things. They edit files and they restart processes. If you can do those two things, you can do anything in Unix. But it turns out that none, and by the way, so in that context, right, awk, grep, sed, these are management tools, right? They require a little more work on your part than some of the other management tools, but they're management tools. And it turned out that when you took those tools and you put them on Windows, they didn't help you at all. And the reason for that is the core architectural difference between Windows and Unix. Unix is a document-oriented operating system, whereas Windows is an API-oriented operating system. Okay, so awk didn't work against WMI. Sed didn't work against the registry. grep didn't work against Active Directory. I can just go on and on and on. All the interesting stuff that you want to do in Windows is hidden behind some API, often with different runtime, language bindings, etc. It's kind of a, it's a challenge. So when we took these Unix tools and we put them on Windows, they just flat out didn't work. They didn't help. They didn't do anything. And so that's why we had to invent PowerShell. We really did try and invent as little as possible. But if you take a look at PowerShell, it really is as simple as trying to implement the Unix composable model, but instead of working on documents, we work on APIs, and then we flow objects through our pipeline instead of text. And it turns out that that approach has all sorts of great benefits. So to the question, why desired state configuration, it's really about why do we need to do PowerShell? And that is because configuration management tools that just work on documents don't work particularly well on Windows. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to provide a tool-agnostic platform that we would go out and get everybody in the industry to write configuration management providers, and then our customers could go, then configuration management tools could layer on top of that, and then our customers could then choose from the various tools. So that's really what it's about. So now what is desired state configuration? So it's basically a model that has three parts. At the heart of it is this thing we call a document, right? The document. This is the way we want things to be. That then gets sent to a WMI, a Windows Management Instrumentation. It parses that document and then calls a number of providers. Now there's two types of providers. There's some native code WMI providers, and then there are PowerShell providers. Now here, the PowerShell providers, really, people could have been doing this all the time. In fact, a lot of people do. It's really just a set of conventions for how to write a PowerShell script. Instead of arbitrary PowerShell scripts, you model things as a resource, and you say, give me a tester, a setter, and a getter, and then follow these rules, idempotency, etc. And with that, we then have desired state configuration. It really is that simple. So I get this document, hand it to something, it parses the document, calls the providers to make it so. But here's the question, how did I get the document? And the answer is any way you want, and that's where the ecosystem comes in. Okay? Now you'll see that PowerShell, we've extended the language to make it easier to generate that document. But configuration management tools can either call PowerShell and have it generate the document, or generate the document directly. And we use standards-based management. So this entire tool chain can be on a Linux machine. It doesn't even have to be on Windows. I mean, it really does. It starts from my core belief that if my customers have the widest choice of tools, I prosper. And in particular, that they're not choosing one tool over another because somebody did the grungy work to manage, get this thing configurable versus that thing configurable. Customers should be able to choose whatever tool they want and know they'll be able to manage all the elements of my platform. That's my motivation. Now, some people look at this and get confused and they say, well, geez, with desired state configuration, do I need any configuration management products? Do I replace them? Can DSC replace them? And I assert the answer is, think about PerfMon, right? Performance Monitor. Performance Monitor is a simple in-the-box tool that caused the entire ecosystem to write performance counters, right? And who manages their enterprise with PerfMon, right? No one, right? No one. Right? But what PerfMon did was that it enabled this great, rich, multi-billion-dollar industry called performance management tools. System Center, yeah, we have tools in that space, but BMC, HP, IBM, all these guys built great tools, all layered on top of that, all taking their own perspective of how to do performance management. So that's really what we're about. We're about providing a tool that we're, a platform that is tool agnostic. We're going to do the hard work to go drive universal coverage throughout our ecosystem, throughout, Microsoft. Desired state configuration management coverage is a required component starting next year. It's something we call the common engineering criteria. It's the set of stuff. It's the reason why you all have great PowerShell coverage. Because a few years ago we said, if you want to ship a product, you have to do this. We're now on stage to make that a requirement for all products going forward starting next year. So we're going to go drive coverage of all Microsoft and all of our ecosystem coverages, and then products can layer on top of it. And I got to say, I'm really pleased working with the Chef guys. I just think they've hired some fantastic Windows talent. We used to work with Adam, so when he calls, we know exactly who he is. We call. I came here and say, oh, I'm going to do this talk, and a number of people are like, oh, tell Adam we said hello. So that's been, we have great collaboration with Adam. As we've discussed things, we've talked to him about how he needs to change things to have a better experience. And in discussing things, we've got requirements that we're now driving changes to the platform so that it works better with Chef. So this has been a very good partnership. And then I saw yesterday Steve Murawski is now working at Chef. Now, if you don't know Steve Murawski, you all will pretty soon. But here's the thing you want to know about Steve Murawski. Basically, Steve's been a very active and fantastic user and proponent of desired state configuration. And basically, I left the standing order with the team. If Steve calls, stop what you're doing, answer that call, and then take whatever he says and put it to the top of the list. Anyway, so Chef has some fantastic Windows talent, and we have a great partnership, and I think you're going to see the results of some of that. So, thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeffrey. Yes. All right. So, Chef and DSC. So now we know, everybody knows what Chef is, I think. And now you know what DSC is. So yeah, I want to kind of line them up so we can kind of see where there's some similarities with Chef. And like Jeffrey was sort of saying, like this kind of will show you how I think we can take advantage of what the DSC team has done. So this is just a little table I threw together talking about if you sort of had a little bucket list of like, here's important things in a configuration management tool or system. So things like the buzzwords of like configuration as code, having some kind of a domain-specific language, embedding that language within a more powerful general purpose language, the concept of resource as a unit of modeling, attributes that you can configure on the resource, idempotent conversions, like to me the biggest things that I worry about. These are all, we see the same things in Chef and DSC. We just take a quick look at fragments. These aren't fully, the DSC extract here is not the full syntactic. How many people have actually used DSC, by the way? All right, and it's not just the Microsoft people. I saw some non-Microsoft people. Good. You know, so the DSC thing on the side is not a full fragment, but it's close. If you look, there's kind of a pretty easy correspondence there, I think you'll agree, between if I wanted to express something, in this case it's an environment variable, saying I want to have an environment variable named editor, and I want to set the value to Emacs, sorry Vim people, you know, these two pieces of code, one in the DSC, PowerShell DSC DSL, and one in the Chef DSL basically they do the same thing, set an environment variable. So if we do some more side-by-side comparisons, we list the resources that you can model. So a resource is just something in the operating system that you might want to configure. It could be an environment variable, it could be a file, it could be a zip file, a software package. So these are all familiar concepts, and we have the same things in Chef and DSC. Like some of them have the exact same name. And those aren't the only ones that have the exact same names. There's several more. But there's a lot of, I think, what Jeffrey kind of referred to as the grunge work or the dirty work. There's actually a lot of other resources. I mean, both DSC and Chef have their own specific resources to those systems. With DSC, like, there have been 50 or 60 resources that were released earlier in the year out of band of PowerShell 4.0. So it's just, hey, here's some more resources that you can manage. You don't have to update PowerShell or anything like that. You can just import this PowerShell module. And so, you know, all of a sudden now you can manage, you know, stuff. I don't know, how many of you have Active Directory at home? Good. I like seeing that. I'm not the only one. But, okay, and we also probably have Active Directory at work. But, you know, I want to manage my domain controller at home and anywhere I am. With like the way I've been doing it now, I've been logging in and doing RDP. There are some PowerShell commandlets that I've been using, but I'd love to have like a recipe that I could just run and change and edit. And so now I'm going to be able to do that. SQL high availability configurations. I do not like setting up SQL high availability configurations. I've had to do it in the past. So I love that there are resources to do that as code. IIS, there's a lot of other ones. So I'll be looking for the Exchange and SharePoint resources pretty soon, I think. So there's actually a lot of stuff just in DSC. And, you know, that's a lot of hard work to go do that. We're definitely prepared to do that kind of stuff at Chef. We've done a lot of it. We've had cookbooks where we've done a lot of it. But if Microsoft's already, you know, putting tons of resources into this, we'd love to take advantage of that and move a lot faster. So yeah, there's a lot of things about Chef and DSC that are similar. So I brought my some Lego blocks. You know, these are official Legos, like Duplo Legos for like 5-year-olds or something like that. This is like a different brand. It's not Lego, but you know, I have both of them. I'd like to be able to make stuff out of both of these. So we'll see if we can do that. So yeah, can I have both? And you know, there might be different things that different people want. The Chef users are going to want more and more resources for Windows. So I don't know, how many of you do both Unix and Windows? Okay, lots. How many are just pure Windows, at least in your job, pure Windows? Okay, not that many, sort of, okay. And how many pure Unix? Okay, so a lot of, almost, hey, Mandy, that's not true. So the vast majority of us are in the mixed case, right? So I think there are things that we're going to want out of Chef and out of DSC that I think we're all going to want that no matter where we're coming from. So yeah, I'd like to be able to build with both. So maybe be able to make something like this. So I didn't have to use a hammer. So it turns out, I don't know if there was some, like, you know, block standards committee back in the 90s and they agreed on something, but DMTF, yes. So so yeah, but here's what it actually looks like. So in Chef, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce 3 new Chef resources. So the first one is the one I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today. It's called DSC resource, and it's essentially will allow you to have an analog of any DSC resource in your Chef recipe. So anything that you read about in DSC, whether it's Windows feature, archive, SQL high availability cluster resource, you will be able to turn those into a Chef resource using this DSC resource entity. There are 2 other ones that I'm not going to talk a lot about today. They're conceptually, I think, relatively easy to understand. One of them is DSC script, and that would just let you take a specification in the DSC DSL, which is PowerShell-based DSL, and just reference it or use it to configure a system. And that might be useful because you might already have like a bunch of PowerShell that you wrote for DSC, and you just want to maybe use it from a Chef recipe without changing it. Another one is DSC MOF. So for those of you who are familiar with MOF, I've been using it since what, 2000, 1999? I don't remember when we introduced it into Windows. It's a standard, it's not just Windows, but it's used very heavily, especially if you use WMI. And that's, as Jeffrey was saying, as part of the underpinnings of DSC. And you can also take that MOF representation, that document, and do the same types of things you might do with DSC script. So those are some resources that I think are useful. But for this talk, we're going to talk mostly about DSC resource. So I'll do a quick demo here. So what I'll show you, oh, I forgot to make the font big. All right, let's see. Let's make it pretty big. Okay. Yeah, I think that's. Can you see that? Good. All right. So this is a usage of DSC resource right here. Let me fix this one more thing. So you see something, if you're familiar with Chef, this is just normal Chef. You see a resource name. So this resource is called DSC resource. And what this thing is going to do is it's going to remove a security group, get rid of remove something from a security group, and or sorry, delete a security group, and it's going to use this resource in DSC called group. We actually have a resource called group in Chef, but this is a nice one to demo because it's pretty easy to understand. So in DSC, there's one called group, and I'm just going to say this group is named demo1. I want you to remove it. Then you probably wouldn't do this normally in the real world. I'm going to add it back. So that's what this second thing does here. So I say I want to use a resource, the DSC resource named group, and I want to, the name that of the group I want to remove is demo1, or sorry, to add, and then I want to add administrator to that group. And then I'm going to, just for fun, do the same thing again to demonstrate idempotence. So let's go over to PowerShell and do it. So I am using some other cool stuff in here. I'm using ps-get and I'm using ps-readline. So for those of you who like readline, you can have it in PowerShell. All right, so hopefully the colors will make it obvious what's happening. So I'm going to run Chef client here. I'm using Chef 0 to execute this recipe. So it's the same. It was just that code that you saw there. So this is going to run. Chef 0 is just a local version of the Chef server, which I like to use instead of Chef Solo. And we were talking about this a little bit before things started. Someone was saying, yeah, Ruby 2.0 seems to be a lot faster on Windows, and so I agree. Unfortunately, this is Ruby 1.93, so I didn't put the latest Ruby on here. But it'll get going pretty soon. So what you'll see is, okay, so now we're doing something. It's going to go and tell DSC to go, execute this group resource. You'll probably see some flashing up top. That's not something we would finally ship. We wouldn't have the little flashing, but it's nice for a demo because then you can see that DSC's local configuration manager is getting invoked. We have to invoke it both to figure out if the resource is converged, and if it's not, there's a little green line there. so you probably can't read it, but the green line says that it basically it says that it had to execute the group resource, and that was when it did the remove. The second green line is when it did the add. And then the third, there's a third little thing over here with the star. There's no green line there for the third resource because it was just a copy. It was just doing the same thing the other one had done. And so that is Chef using DSC under the covers. Now, what I'm going to talk about next is kind of how the syntax that we're kind of thinking of right now and how we arrived at it and all that other stuff, and also a bunch of the technical challenges we had to solve. So first thing, you guys should go get the code for this. So this is actually a prototype. It's a cookbook right now. We're going to put it into Core Chef. We're working on it right now. But we've been talking about this for a while. We've been doing some demos of DSC for a decent amount of time now, and we're impatient for you to be able to try it out. We're open source, so we like to do our development out in the opening where you can see it and comment and give us feedback. So, you know, if you guys, whoever's got their laptop open, you should probably clone it right now. So I don't know if anyone successfully cloned it. I see some typing. I'm going to assume, though, that maybe you just tried to see it and you can't. So it turns out that you can't see it because it's private. So, you know, I think what we should do is I think we should fix that. So why don't we fix that, okay? All right, it's public now. Thank you. All right. So yes. So now that it's on GitHub, you could clone it and play around with it. It's got a little bit of a README. There's still a lot more, I think, to talk about in it, and it definitely doesn't have all the features we're going to put in. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. We will release this cookbook to Supermarket, and with a lot of like caveats like, hey, this is just for learning and trying things out. It will be superseded by functionality in Core Chef Client, but we want you to be able to comment. I'll also have an RFC out that will announce an IRC channel and in the mailing list. So the request for comments, I don't know if you've looked at any of the ones we've had before. It's just like a normal request for comments. You can go and say, tell us what you think about what we're doing, and you know, we'll also talk about this stuff in IRC, etc. Thank you. All right, so now I'd like to do a little bit of a deep dive on what we just saw, because yeah, you just saw a little bit of DSL, and you know, it's just a little bit of text, right? So let's talk about why, yeah, you know, you can have it all. You can have your DSC and your Chef. All right, so here's the idea. What we want to do is we want to keep using the good old Chef DSL that we're all used to. But we want to find a way of mapping sort of the human's understanding of DSC. So like if you know DSC already, you know about DSC resources, you know how to find them on MSDN or TechNet, and you know like the name of the resource and understand the syntax for using it in PowerShell, etc. You should be able to take that knowledge and just use it with Chef if you know a little bit of Chef. And then what we want to do is you know, we want to make those DSC resources from the Chef resources, so we need to automate that translation. And then if there's any little bumps, we want to kind of smooth those out to make it you know, easy to do, easy to use, and so there's nothing funny. The systems are very similar, but they are different. So like, you know, there's a lot of stuff in DSC that we're not going to take advantage of. We're going to talk about integrating at the resource level. There's a lot of stuff where if you want to have multi-system collections, like a document that describes a configuration across machines, but there's still, this is the resources where we're integrating. So yeah, here I sort of try to give a picture of, you know, what the process is to get from the user understanding of a resource on the system to a converged operating system through DSC. So you sort of start with what's in your head, this user mapping, you write it out in the Chef DSL like you're used to, and then Chef Client takes that, and then for these DSC resources, it's going to do a translation and hand it off to DSC's local configuration manager, and then you get a converged resource, a file, a registry key, whatever it is you're trying to manage, IIS being installed. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the DSL that we showed. We're going to go look at it in more detail. So the one extreme to doing this work would be to just say, hey, why don't you just paste some DSC PowerShell script in a chef recipe, call it good, right? We can do that with an execute resource or script resource. And that actually is, like I was saying earlier, it's useful for certain scenarios. If you already have such content and you want to reuse it, that's good. But that's not like a real integration. That's not taking real advantage and helping users be more efficient. So the other extreme would be if we sat down and looked at the TechNet stuff, the community, Chef, whoever, and said, okay, here's one called MSFT SQL High Availability. Okay, let's make one with a very similar name in Chef and follow the Chef Ruby syntax and make sure it has all the same things. And if there's anything funny that doesn't translate, let's come up with a way to deal with it, like say there's a collision in naming in Chef and DSC. So yeah, we could do that, but that's not efficient, doesn't scale, etc. And I don't think that's what any of us want. So how do we deal with that? Well, at Chef we just automate everything. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're just going to actually automate the way that you get those resources. So if you're going to write a DSC script or MOF, you need to know things like the DSC resource names, like Windows feature, environment, archive. Then you need to know the properties of that thing, right? So archive has a property called path, and Windows feature has a property called name. Environment has a property called name and one called value. So you just need to know those things. Now, if we can just have a DSL, a Chef DSL, that captures those items, the resource name and the properties, then we should just be able to automate that, right? There's no reason you should have to go and like manually write down all that stuff yourself and then come up with a way of doing it. So the first approach that we looked at was to do some Ruby metaprogramming. How many love to do Ruby metaprogramming in here? Good, you're all sane people. Thank you. That's not true of a lot of people. Ruby is great for doing that. So there's a few challenges if you do the metaprogramming approach. So here's some of the challenges. So one of the challenges, so the idea here would be, most of you may realize that every Chef resource is a class in Ruby. It's just a Ruby class. It inherits from Chef resource. And so really all we need to do is synthesize classes that inherit from Chef resource. So the issue there is, like, you can't, if there's a resource in DSC called file, you can't create a new Chef class called file that inherits from Chef resource, because there is already one in Chef. So if you want to have the DSC version of that, you have to come up with a way of resolving the collision. So we'll just put a prefix. We'll just prefix everything with DSC underscore prefix. Another thing is PowerShell, like many good things in life, is case insensitive. I prefer case insensitivity in my file names, but anyway, so that's an issue when you're in Ruby in the Unix world. You can't just do a direct translation. You have to deal with the fact that things are case insensitivity or case insensitive. So one of the things we can do to work around that, we can just always downcase everything and require that when you're in Ruby, you're always downcased. And actually, in the Ruby language, case matters. You can't just have an identifier with random case, uppercase for constants, all kinds of other rules about case. So you can't just do a direct translation. Certain things have to be all lowercase, certain things have to start with the uppercase. Other things just conflict with keywords, things that you call keywords in Ruby. So ensure, right? Ensure is for doing what? Exception handling in Ruby. But it's also a very commonly used word in DSC world. And so you can't just take that DSC, the ensure word, and translate it directly into something in Ruby. So that's okay. We could come up with a strategy for that and remap that too. So here's what that looks like. If any of you looked at some of the talk that we did at ChefConf, right, this is actually that was what we demoed. So we did, it was actually fun to kind of put this together to come up with the conflict resolution. How do you detect that you've tried to create a class and you're getting a conflict with a Ruby reserved word or whatever? So we came up with a way of doing that in an automated fashion. So if you look at what the DSL looks like, here's some DSC fragment right here on the left. That really translates into this over here on the right. I added an include directive so that you could do some introspection and discover and synthesize the class that you would want to use in Ruby. So this term creates, this include DSC takes the DSC Windows feature resource, turns it into a Ruby class that shows up as this DSC underscore Windows feature thing. And then like we had some collisions, so we had to put like some of these things collided, so we put DSC underscore in front of them. So that's great. And so yeah, how do you know what things to put? Well, we didn't always resolve the collision, so I didn't actually show that sometimes if it didn't collide, we didn't put the prefix. So, so yeah, how do you know what to type? And so we just need to go look at TechNet to understand DSC, and then use this really simple translation rules. Let me see if I have those simple translation rules here. Yeah, right here. All right, so the simple translation rules. So, you know, there's step 1, step 2, 3, and then there's step 4. So these are all about like what to do about changing the case and putting the prefix there. And then, yeah, there's some cases that the other 2 cases don't apply. You got to do some other rule. Oh, and here's step 5. Sorry. So yeah, then there's these ones, depending on whether it's a certain kind of CLR type, because we're doing some type coercion. Okay. Anyway, so see, that's all really simple. And I think I even tried to highlight that at the top. Oh, I didn't. So Julian Dunn, I don't know, some of you may know Julian Dunn. He read this document before we did sort of a talk about this at TechEd recently, and he really went after me about this following simple rules phrase. So anyway, that's for you, Julian. Okay, so let's change this a little bit. So you know, metaprogramming is ultra cool. Let's be clear. You can do that in PowerShell. You can do it in Ruby, other languages. But it sometimes is a little bit, you can go a little crazy with it. Maybe you should just write your own compiler if you really want to start going that crazy. I don't know. So is there something we can do that's a little bit simpler that gives us what we want? Usually you do this metaprogramming stuff because you want to have a nice, seamless way of expressing something, and you don't want to have to do funny, you know, awkward-looking things in the language. So over here, I've sort of given a fragment of some Chef for the file resource. This is actually part of the work that was done around 2011 to add security ACL support for Windows in Chef. So you can say that this rights property essentially lets you set parts of the security descriptor. And so it has a pattern of you specify the attribute multiple times, and what it's really doing under the covers when you pass it these arguments, these symbols and these names, is it's going and building a hash under the covers. So this lets you sort of have a concept of having like something like an attribute or a property or a set of things that are similar without having to do sort of the direct like the metaprogramming tricks. And it lets you do this dynamically. So let's see what happens if we apply that here. So in this world, we kind of step back. We don't synthesize the classes anymore. We don't dynamically make new Ruby classes. As much fun as that was, if you look in that repo, I still left the original implementation there if you go back to the first commit, so you can go see how much fun that was. Yeah, you know, what we'll do is we'll just have one resource called DSC resource. You'll have to use an attribute to specify the name. So originally, I really didn't want to do that, but it's only one line. So you'll have to say resource name, Windows feature. You can do the repeated use of an attribute, we call it property, to build this collection of properties. So the things like that you saw earlier, whether it's name and value and those things, those will be added into the hash internally when you call the property method. We will, now one criticism of doing it this way is that, well, you can't validate the properties right away. Like if you know the type of something, you know it's supposed to be a Boolean, and someone tries to express it in the DSL with something else, you can immediately give them, you know, a sad or an anger. So we will still do that. We'll just do it at converge time, which is pretty common in the Chef world. And then another benefit of doing this is that all the DSC identifiers can just be case sensitive from the case insensitive from the standpoint of the user. So this simplifies that whole translation thing. The translation can be really naive. You really just need to focus on, do I know the names of the resources and the names of the attributes? You don't have to worry about, did I get the case correct in this case? We don't have to worry about solving that internally. So it actually makes the rules about, and there's no collisions with this approach. That's the biggest thing. There's no like, oh, you're colliding with a Ruby keyword or an existing chef class or anything like that. So you don't have to think about it. It's just very simple. So really, you just have to understand DSC, and you can do a very simple usage. All right. So this is the new try, and as you can see, it's actually not. It's not that much. It's still pretty simple. In fact, one of the things it does is we don't need the include directive anymore to create a class that's available at compile time. So that we actually get rid of that sort of complexity. So we just say if we want to use Windows feature as a DSC resource, we just have to specify this attribute, Windows feature, as a symbol. If you got the case wrong, it doesn't matter. If you reflexively use the case that you see in the documentation for PowerShell, it'll still work perfectly fine. You don't have to remember all the Ruby rules because symbols you can abuse case. And then you do have to put one little extra word in front of the property and value assignment. So you have to put the word property. So that I would like to not do that, but I think it's a decent trade-off for what we're doing. And great. So that's the DSL. Now, how does the translation actually work? So we still need to find out, like Chef needs to know something about DSC. We're not just going to blindly hand this stuff off to DSC and say, we think we made something that might be valid DSC based off this resource and these properties. I hope it works. Try it, DSC. That has all kinds of implications for like being able to give you error feedback and just other weird unintended things that could happen if it doesn't work the right way. So what we do is we just use PowerShell to do some introspection. So I can just give a really simple example of that because it was built into DSC. You can just use get DSC resource. It's a commandlet that comes with PowerShell 4, and I can just give it the name of a resource, a DSC resource. So I'll say Windows feature, and it'll do a little bit of churning. What it's going to do is going to show some information about that feature or that resource. Let me try it this way. Oh, and actually, yeah, it's still, I need to do the nested property thing, which I'm not going to try to do while I'm on stage. So this is a little bit better. This gives you more information. Here's the name. Here's some information about where this resource originates, like the PowerShell module. That actually matters, by the way, from a Chef standpoint, because we have to dynamically import the PowerShell modules. So when you do get DSC resource, it'll show you resources, but they may not be available for use. You actually have to import them sometimes. So Chef can figure that out. It will see that, oh, that module isn't imported, and we'll go import it for you. So that's some work it does under the covers when we do this. That properties thing over here, this actually lists all the properties. So it has here, it's maybe hard to see, it says name, credential, depends on ensure. So those are the properties in the resource that you can set, and these will be what you want to set in Chef as well. And so Chef learns about what those are. It has type information, which is great because we're going to do some type coercion. So we're going to take Boolean types from Ruby, like true and false, and turn them into like $true and $false in Chef, sorry, in DSC. So there's other type conversions we can do as well. There's a case of nested resources where you can actually have a DSC resource that's the value of a property gets assigned to it, or the other way around rather. So we can handle all those cases because we introspect on the types. All right. So now how does Ruby read that information? Well, we use one of my favorite commands of all time that was introduced in PowerShell 3, convert to JSON. That is a great thing. Ruby loves JSON. It may not love XML very much, but it really loves JSON. So once you convert something to JSON, you can take that information that was showing on the screen earlier, convert it to Ruby data structures by just dumping it into JSON, and then Ruby can just deserialize it, and you're good. So we turn it into a hash in Ruby, and now Chef can do all kinds of stuff. It knows that when it's time to converge, it can go check to make sure, did you specify a property that wasn't valid? Did you specify the wrong type to that property, etc.? All right, now what about idempotence? So, it'd be one thing that was a little bit of a challenge, and was that what we want to do is we don't want to go, even though DSC is idempotent, and I could say, hey, here's a group, remove this user from the group, and it's not going to die because the user's already not there, right? It's going to do the right thing. Or add a user, it's not going to try to do it twice. So that's fine. But I didn't find a direct way to do that, to find out from DSC, hey, do I need to actually talk to you? And spend the time telling you to do something when nothing's going to happen, and also not be able to surface correctly to my users that I needed to change something. But good old what if mode in PowerShell came to the rescue. And Jeffrey, I feel kind of embarrassed because I didn't think Jeffrey was going to be at this talk. So I may show a little bit of the code that we used to do that. And I will say it is some, there's some parsing going on, some text parsing. Yeah, but if I could submit a pull request to PowerShell to add a feature to tell DSC, are you going to do something or not, then, that would help me out. We can actually just show that really fast. Thank you. I'm almost as good as Steve Morosky then. Let's see, is it in here? So here I wrote lots of a really big comment about what the output of the what if looks like. And so here is like a regular expression I use to figure out that here's something you will only see if you're actually updating the resource, if you're going to update the resource. So then I know, yeah, but then I know the right thing, and that's why I can correctly show the little, if I didn't do that, Chef would just call in there, and it would always say the resource was updated, and nothing bad would happen to the system, but it would give an inaccurate, give you invalid results. You would question Chef at that point as a user, because one of your beliefs in Chef is that it's not going to do anything unless you need to do something, and so it's just not good. But what if, one of the reasons I was never really that concerned is like, well, all PowerShell commands have what if, so I'm not too concerned. There'll be a way to do this. So that's what we did. Yes, Alex.
Do you actually need a not if or only if with a DSC resource?
So the question was, do you need a guard like a not if or only if with a DSC resource? You don't. The not if and only if guards are part of all Chef resources, so you can't really make them not be there. I guess you could do some metaprogramming and get rid of them. But so they're there, but yes, you probably wouldn't use them. All right, so when can I have this? All right, so like I said, on GitHub, if you go to GitHub right now, it's out there. You can play with it. Very much prototype code, all about demonstrating, solving certain technical problems. But you can try it out with any recent version of Chef. You do need PowerShell 4. I'm assuming everyone's at least on PowerShell 4 if they're not running the preview of PowerShell 5, right? Yes, okay. And you should expect some changes between like now and the final release for sure. Like this is super early stuff. We're in the middle of integrating it. The RFC is out there because we expect the community to give us feedback and we want to be able to respond to it. So we will put it on the on Supermarket. How many people are have tried out Supermarket? Great. For those who aren't good. For those who aren't familiar with Supermarket, it's the community site. That's what we call it now. So the revamp. So check it out if you haven't tried it out. And we want to get this in, the next quarterly release we can. So we're just releasing one right now. So we have a full amount of time to try to get it in. So we're going to work hard to try to get it into to the next upcoming release. Yeah. Oh, and this is like an extra slides. Okay. So skip past that. So yeah, how can you help, right? Just play with this. Go on GitHub on that repo that I have. You can make some comments there, and go to the mailing list, all that sort of thing. You can comment on the RFC. Go to IRC channel. we've instituted a new bi-weekly community chef community meeting in the Chef Hacking IRC room. So it's at 9 a.m. Pacific on every other Friday. It's not this Friday, so it'll be next Friday. So those are places where you can go talk about all kinds of stuff. And just keep an eye on the chef repository. You know, it's all out in the open, so you can see when we're adding this stuff, and you can try it out and let us know.